The purpose of WealthTalk is to educate, inform, and hopefully entertain you on the subject of building your wealth. WealthBuilders recommends you should always take independent financial, tax, or legal advice before making any decisions around your finances.
Welcome to episode 138 of Wealth Talk. My name's Christian Rodwell, the Membership Director for WealthBuilders, and I'm joined today by our founder, Mr. Kevin Whelan. Hi, Kevin.
Hello, Chris. Great to be with you again and looking forward to sharing the second core step on the roadmap.
Yes, in fact, stage 2. So last week, episode 137, we kicked off looking at the 9-step recurring revenue roadmap, which is the process we teach all of our members inside the Wealth Builders Academy of how to move from a place of financial insecurity to a place of financial independence. And we always say the shocking statistic, really, Kevin. It's not a laughing matter, really, but 95% of people in the UK never achieve financial independence, and we want to make our mark and help a few more people.
Oh, we certainly do. We want people to be part of the 5%. And look, it's the same probably whatever country you're in. We know it's the same in the US as it is here. So it's not that there's anything culturally different. I think all of us who are brought up with the same old philosophy of, education turns into job turns into pension turns into retirement. It's just an outdated model. And even the busiest and brightest minds, we're talking to medical trained people this week, doctors, dentists, some of the brightest people academically, but they're still falling into that time for money trap, and very difficult to get out of that unless you've got a plan, you follow the plan, but just as importantly, you don't get deviated from the plan, because it's too easy in a world where everything is Googleable that you can be sidetracked into getting information, but the information doesn't actually lead you to taking steps of action. That creates wealth, and we know this, Chris. It's something we see every single day.
Yeah, and we teach this process, tried and tested, and last week we covered stage 1, all about building confidence, and there's 3 steps in stage 1, and we covered that off, which was step 1, mindset, step 2 is the foundation, and step 3 is the roof. So if you haven't listened to last week's episode, press pause now, go back, listen to that one before you continue with this one. So they all run in sequence. And we're actually building up to our next live webinar, Kevin, which we're hosting on Wednesday, the 9th of February in the evening. That kicks off at 7:30, where we're going to reveal all of this on screen. We're going to bring in some of our existing members and some of our coaches and just have a good time really together, just looking at the process and hearing how it's helped others.
Yeah, try to demystify things, because it can be extraordinarily complicated to think, back to the mindset piece. You think, it's too complicated for me. I can't do it. I need to delegate this to somebody else because it's too complex. Well, it isn't. And pretty much everybody who follows the process gets there. It just takes between 3 and 7 years. So it doesn't really matter, does it? In the end, if you spend a few years creating financial independence and then a lifetime being financially independent, as we say, no race. So there's no worry if there isn't a race, because you're not comparing or competing with anybody other than your own capability.
Yeah. So please do join us for that webinar. We'd really love to see you there. Get your smartphone now, or if you're on a computer, head to wealthbuilders.co.uk/academy webinar. And join us on Wednesday, the 9th of February, 7:30 p.m. kicking off. So today, we're going to focus on stage 2 of the roadmap, Kevin. So we've got 3 stages. As I said, last week was stage 1, all about building confidence, putting the foundations in place. And then that moves into stage 2, which is all about building knowledge. And then next week, we're going to look at stage 3, which is building assets. So let's zoom in then. Stage 2. So stage 2 consists of 3 steps, which is assets, leverage, and strategy. So let's begin with assets, Kevin. And this really is the core piece of Wealth Builders IP, which is all about the 7 pillars of wealth. So perhaps, you can tell us, where did this all come from? How did you come up with the 7 pillars?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Chris. And I think I've always been a visionary in my head. I've always been a creative. I've always liked the visual side of things. I see things in a big picture. And as I was making my own journey to wealth, charting it as I went, no guides, no mentors, nothing, I was getting the same questions from people who I was pretty much just mentoring, really. The only service that was available way back was me mentoring to, what you would call high net worth clients who wanted to turn high net worth income into high net worth wealth. And they were paying a premium for it because I was just finding them, just by referral, really. And what I found was the same questions coming up time and time again. And I thought, this is teachable, but the challenge is, I need to get it into a place where I can break it down so smart people can not be overwhelmed by it. And so, originally started off with 5 pillars and, had an exercise around that, enjoyed that, the clients liked that. And then as I thought more about it, I realized that, I was expanding my own knowledge and expanding my own wealth and decided to add a couple more. So that's how it kind of really came about. And I suppose historically, we could break it down, although there are 7, and we believe only 7 ways or assets that you can use to build wealth. And of course, importantly, as an economist, I had to conjure up the definition of an asset, didn't I, Chris? Which probably isn't in keeping with an accountant's definition, but simplistically said, assets build wealth because assets build cash flow. So simple as ABC, assets build cash flow. So if they do, you have to understand what they are. So I articulate that there are 7 and only 7. And for the most part, an asset we would count as this: something you own that is not you. Now, increasingly now, it's something you can control. So now it's something you own and control that is not you. So it's not your own time. It's not your own job. It's not something you do by trading anything in terms of activity. It puts money in your bank account while you're asleep, which is the key thing about something that's often called passive, but we don't call it passive. We call it recurring, because any form of income needs to be managed in some way. And that's certainly true. There isn't anything that's truly passive. So you have to manage. So second part then, something that puts money in your bank account while you're asleep. And of course, just as importantly, that you can pass that money on to others. So you can pass it on to good causes. One of my clients is completely focused on giving almost all of his money with what he earns himself to live to charitable causes, an outstanding way to live your life. But to your family, to loved ones, to anybody you care to, and that the money continues to show up and you don't need to show up. So therefore, logically, it's a legacy. So that's the key issue, right? So if you think about it again, it's something you own or control. It puts income automatically into your bank account, and it doesn't die when you die. They're the 3 important ingredients. And I determined that there were 7 of those, and keep asking for people to give me number 8. That would be great. So if you've got a number 8 beyond this one, I'd be happy to hear from you. But number 1, 2, and 3, Chris, is what most people have. And it's back to that old plan, the 95% plan, which is having a home that you live in, having some kind of pension or retirement plan, and having some kind of cash or investments. So most people have those 3. We call number 1 your home capacity, your ability to create an income around your home or in your home or from your home. But most people don't do that. They live in a home, they have a mortgage, they eventually pay the mortgage off. It doesn't generate any income at all. And as Robert Kiyosaki will often say, your home is a liability, not an asset. But it's a potential asset, isn't it? Because we know so many people, Chris, who turned their home into a very solid stream of income, don't we?
Yes, they have indeed. Yes, many of our members, and probably some of them be sharing on the webinar, I imagine. Yeah. So the first 3 pillars there, we call those the traditional pillars. And as you say, most likely that some people have some form of those in their life, but usually under-leveraged. And they can really be the fuel, can't they, for the other 4 pillars, which we call the entrepreneurial pillars.
Yes, but just to touch on pillars 2 and 3 there very briefly, because there's a big problem I see consistently, Chris, which is for the most part when people have a pension created either by their workplace or created privately, they're putting their money into the stock market and they don't really understand, I guess, how the market works, how they can control risk, and how the stock market doesn't put money into your bank account while you're asleep. It sometimes puts it in, sometimes takes it out. There's no automated income flowing from that. And the third one is if people are buying into the stock market through investment plans of all kinds, whether they're labeled with ISAs or bonds or whatever they are, trackers, they're investing in the stock market in some way. So there tends to be then an over-reliance on the stock market, as we saw from the debits example last week. So many people unwittingly pay a ransom to have their money managed in the stock market, which deprives them of income, because the real wealth that's being created in the stock market is the wealth of the financial services institutions. And we work devilishly hard, don't we, Chris, to keep people's costs down so that they reduce the cost of owning money in the stock market, but ideally try and learn how not to over-concentrate the money in the market, when in the end they're trying to create certainty of income from an asset which is fundamentally uncertain. Now, I'm not saying don't have money in the stock market. I didn't say that. I'm saying it's a very dangerous place to put the vast majority of your long-term wealth into a stock market which is fundamentally high cost, volatile, and very difficult to turn the uncertainty of the market into a regular cash flow, which is why we encourage people to do things differently inside the stock market, which is why we do help people understand what to do with their pensions and investments, but also how to understand that there are other ways to build wealth where you're more part of creating the value rather than participating in the ride that the value gives you. You're doing something yourself to change something, to add value, to understand how you can do something that can create that recurring income for yourself. And as you quite rightly say, Chris, we call them the entrepreneurial pillars because we believe entrepreneurs are people who seek to create value for others, but also to create a revenue and critically a recurring revenue for themselves. And you can mention what those other four are, Chris, if you like.
Yeah, and there's a couple of key differences, aren't there, between the traditional pillars and the entrepreneurial pillars. A lack of control. So the first three, you don't really have much control over those, and also the potential for returns is lower. So yeah, let me say what the four entrepreneurial pillars are then. So pillar number 4 is property portfolio. So that's obviously properties that you don't live in, that you're renting out and generating a cash flow from. Business is pillar number 5. So many different types of business that could be created. Intellectual property is number 7. That's obviously, we all have IP. We all have experiences and knowledge and specialisms and things that we know more about.
I think that's number 6, Chris. I think you called it number 7.
Oh, good spot there.
It's a good job. It's my IP, isn't it?
Jumping ahead. So yeah, we've all got IP and we can monetize that often and then be of value to others. And then the final pillar number 7 is joint ventures, and joint ventures can work with pretty much all the other pillars. And sometimes people who perhaps haven't got the financial leverage at the beginning, Kevin, a joint venture is a good way for them to kind of get a step up.
Well, joint venture is all about collaborating. It's about recognizing, just as we did when we talked about step 1, which is about your mindset and understanding your wealth dynamic. It's about understanding what you bring and what other people bring. And pretty much most projects, most ventures, most businesses will go through a series of energies, like planting anything. You've got to create the seed, which is the energy of creativity, or what we call the dynamo energy. You've got the people involved, which is blaze energy, and that needs the harnessing an organization of people. You can see that in a business typically, can't you? But also people do work that projects need to happen. And then you've got the kind of organization and the timing and the stuff you call the tempo energy, getting things done, projects managed and the like. And then, of course, the analysis, the data, the improving, the recording, which is the steel energy. And everything needs to be balanced in that. So joint venture is obviously a way to almost crystallize that those 4 areas of value and get those done by different people so that the whole cycle of what you're doing is done very elegantly by covering it off. So, in the same way as we're doing this, Chris, I'm not really very steel-oriented or tempo-oriented, come to that, much more creative, but you've got a lot of tempo energy. So, you're the guy who arranges, organizes, manages the not just the podcast, of course, but also the programs. And that's really important because I mentioned earlier on that when I was doing this work on my own, I was only doing as much as I could do on my own. Maybe 50, 60 clients a year, paying a reasonably high price, but, that was fine for the amount of work that I could do and wanted to do. Now I can do the same, but of course we can help thousands of others because you've had the ability, Chris, with your team to help kind of bring the IP down to the ground to make it more accessible, to scale it so we can add more value as a business and we can serve more people. So, yeah, we're doing exactly what we're teaching, which is really, really important. And I think being holistic, I don't think I've met another organization, certainly that I've not seen ever, which is completely holistic. It's agnostic also. So we don't grind an axe on you should do this or you should do that. You should do property or you should do IP. It's up to you. What we do is teach them all, teach the pros, teach the cons, teach how it works or might work for you to then go through the process, which I guess we'll cover at the next stage, Chris, which is in stage 3. And the first part of that is the Wheel of Wealth, but we'll get to that, where there's a process that you follow to always go through to make sure that you don't make mistakes. So I'm very excited that, we've got all of these things interlock and overlap, don't they? You could see that. We've just talked about wealth dynamics and how to make joint ventures work. It's all part of that. So all of these points kind of knit together in a way that makes it easy to not lose track and not just go down one pathway.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the whole purpose of the roadmap, is to make sure you're not jumping ahead and missing out really important steps. And you kind of segued nicely, Kevin, talking about the way that we work together. And that's really about leverage, right? That's one of the forms of leverage, which is step 5 in the roadmap. And leverage is about finding different ways to make an asset work harder for you than it currently is. And this is key. It sits at the heart of the roadmap, and you can't build wealth without using leverage.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to build wealth without leverage. It is potentially possible if you inherit $10 million or £10 million and you stick it in the bank, but unusually that doesn't happen. So you have to use some form of leverage. And again, making it easy to teach and thinking about this in my kind of visionary style, we've got 5 forms of leverage, haven't we? Financial, we've got intellectual, relationship, systems and time. And we show you what all those are and show you how to almost matrix what you've got in terms of your finances after you've done your debits, after you've done all of those things. We know what you've got, how to leverage that, make it work harder. Have you got money in pension that you can turn into something else? Have you got money in your property that you could leverage? Have you got money in investments that you could redeploy in some way? Have you got money forgotten that you lost? As we talked about lost pensions last time. So there's so many different ways to bring financial leverage into play. The intellectual one, we talk about what your knowledge base already is, how you can bring what you already know into your wealth building activities rather than just assuming you're starting from a zero base of knowledge, which often people do that and get a bit of an imposter syndrome, don't they, when it comes to their wealth building, that maybe they've just done this job and don't have the right to build their wealth, but they've done incredible things. We were speaking today to someone, Chris, weren't we, who was an award-winning in their field and didn't recognize the awards as being outstanding for themselves because, that's what they get. But by using the leverage of those awards, you can turn that IP into something much more valuable and potentially even investable, as people build their wealth and tell a story that weaves together their old story together with the new story. And I'm very excited about intellectual leverage. And of course, no better leverage, Chris, than working with people and which you miss on DIY, but the relationship leverage. My relationship with you, my relationship with Paul, who is running the SaaS program currently, in just building relationships is at the cornerstone of enjoying wealth instead of it being a struggle or a challenge or in some ways, an overwhelm. So by having a good, solid team of people around you and guides and mentors, wherever you need them, having a big black book of people who can help you, as we believe in that very powerfully, Chris, that relationship leverage.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then systems and time you mentioned there. So people that are already business owners, perhaps time poor business owners, having someone to help them systemize and just look at how they can outsource. And again, look at the relationships around them. How can they make those work more effectively for them? And then the T for time, that's probably the most important element of leverage. You have to maximize your time. And we see many people spinning too many plates or drifting and just really not leveraging their time effectively.
I mean, time gives permission to unlock all the other forms of leverage, because if you're time poor and you believe you're time poor, and we often see that argument, Chris, that, I don't have enough time to build my wealth. Okay. But when you crystallize it down, it's probably, a couple of hours a week, a day, a month, something like that. So if you can't do that, forget it. If you can't give yourself a couple of hours a week, then you're never going to be wealthy. So just don't bother. But if you can give yourself a couple of hours and you can allow someone else to be a form of leverage for you, then you can achieve financial independence within the timeframes that we've been mentioning. So you have to have some time. But of course, as I mentioned recently as well, Chris, as soon as you get to financial security, which is, again, links back to step one, or at least stage one, rather, then you're in a position where you've leveraged your time, because now you've got your day-to-day life expenses covered, your lockdown lifestyle, as we called it. Then you can afford to maybe spend more time doing the things you want to do because your basics are covered. So, so there is a process that expands the amount of time you have to build wealth, and that then leads to a massive increase in your wealth building capability because you've got more time to bring it. So you have to give a little time now to get loads of time in the future. And ultimately, when you're financially independent, then you've got all the time in the world, because you can spend the time doing what you want, with who you want, when you want. It's just a wonderful thing to aspire to, and not that difficult. Not easy, but doable and teachable if you get yourself in the right environment that supports you to do that. So, time unlocks everything else, Chris.
Well, talking about time, I think it's time that we read out another review from Trustpilot, as we like to do. So thank you to everyone who's been leaving reviews in the last 7 days. But we're going to read one out from Krishan, who says, been with WealthBuilders for nearly 2 years. Must say I've been extremely impressed with their overall service and business values. Always act with extreme integrity, and I would certainly recommend them for anyone wanting to take more control of their finances and pension.
There you go. Thank you, Christian. And always good to hear people, express things in their own words. But it seems to be consistently, Chris, we're getting the same thing. We're trustworthy. We're worthy of your trust, and we believe that. That's why we really focus on trying to bring great value, because we know if we keep bringing great value, you'll keep supporting us by being in the community. So it works as a win-win both ways. The integrity word comes up. So I like to strengthen that and say we have unimpeachable integrity, meaning that we never, ever deviate from what's right. We never deviate for what's important to us financially over what's in your best interest. And we completely focus on that point. And so Christian makes the point that I would like to make on our behalf, but he sings it and says it so more elegantly than I ever could.
Yeah, and I'm hearing a lot of the Wealth Builder values. We obviously have our core values, Kevin. We've already talked about being impartial, being holistic, but the whole roadmap is a transformational process. We see that so many times, people who join us and where they end up, where they are, even after 3 months, 6 months, can be transformational. So another core value there. And also we're challenging and community. And I think we have to just spend a second mentioning the power of the community, because I think it's almost a hidden, intangible asset, is people join because they want the structure, they want the education that they know that we can help them with, but don't realize the power and the benefit of other people on that same journey, like-minded people supporting one another, and the friendships that are built up. And we have so many people now, after 1 or 2 years of being in the program, who are working together, setting up businesses. And, it's just fantastic to see that.
Yeah, it's good to see the joint ventures and collaborations that get born out of this. And it's also good to see the IP get locked in. We see so many of our members writing books and creating courses and creating memberships and creating businesses with recurring income, because they understand the values that we've shared in having businesses that create recurring income rather than businesses that just replace jobs, So very important one. And we got one more step. Is that right?
We have. That's it. Step 6 is strategy. So if you've been following along, you've got your pillar. So you've maybe got one or two pillars, which are kind of identifying themselves as your primary, your secondary pillar. You looked at where your points of leverage are coming from, and that will really help to define the right strategy for you. And this is where often we see overwhelm, Kevin, because there are so many strategies, so many different things that people could be doing. And of course, we know the internet bombards you with people telling you this is the best way, this is the best thing to do. So, the whole purpose of being in the program, in the academy, is accountability. It's working with a coach. It's eliminating things that are just not the right thing, or maybe it's not the right time. And strategy is where we help you, really get clear on what is your plan? What are you going to focus on?
Yes, and the strategy applies, different strategies apply to the each pillar. So, for example, the most popular strategy by far, I'd say, is property, and people realize that. But let's say, just for the sake of this podcast, Chris, there are 12 different strategies, say half a dozen for generating cash flow and half a dozen for generating capital. Wow, you can get bombarded pretty quickly because you've got subtext within that. Different types of tenant, different types of opportunity, different geographies, different ways that you need to deal with legislation and compliance. There's a whole raft of things. So because we know all of these things, or if we don't know them, we know the right who to put you in contact with to help solve that, which again, the community does. We get so many questions from people saying, who do you know who? And that's a really good question to ask, because at the other end of a strategy question is always a who's been there before and who knows the answer to the question. And that's really powerful. So it keeps you to a place where you don't get too many strategies to get involved with. And we tend to recommend people stick with one or two, focus your way to that first step in the journey, which is financial security. And then once you've got there, you've got more freedom to be able to diversify into other pillars and other strategies. That's what we normally suggest as the starting point. But it all depends. Everybody's different because they've got different forms of leverage, different amounts of time, different amounts of money they're bringing at the start, and so on. So that's what we do, is try and help narrow that down for you. So you're focusing on the right things, not being pulled apart in the wrong things, and also making sure you're dealing with trusted people, not people who've got their own interests way ahead of yours.
Yeah. So as we said, there's so many strategies within each of those 7 pillars. So it can be a little overwhelming, but that's the purpose of obviously having a coach, having community, having that support. And inside the academy, we have a support desk as well. So Monday to Friday, all of our members can just reach out and get any questions answered. So there's never too long to wait. So yeah, we value ourselves, obviously, Kevin, on good quality education, great support, and trusted connections.
Well, you're signposting next week's episode, Chris, which is where the Wheel of Wealth comes in, which will probably give an example of that and let people download that next week. But for this week, what can they download to be of help, Chris, and to help them register for the webinar if they want to dive in a little further and hear from some of our members and also be able to ask their own questions?
Yes. So if you've enjoyed listening today and you'd like to just find out a bit more about, how we help our members inside the academy, then do register for our webinar that's coming up on the 9th of February, and head to wealthbuilders.co.uk/academy webinar. And when you register for that, you'll get yourself a copy of the roadmap, so you can download that, have a look at that, see exactly what we're talking about on today's episode.
Yeah, and it's good to see it visually, Chris. As I mentioned earlier on, I'm a visual person. I like to see things, and it's really important to get a picture of it, so you don't just listen. Get a copy. You can download it, you can print it, you can look at it, you could listen to the podcast again and go, oh, okay, I get it. It starts to make the whole thing make sense. It's been years in the making, so it's been an investment that I think is worthwhile because people can follow it, they do follow it, and it does work.
Yeah. And if you know someone who maybe might be interested and, you feel this could help them as well, why not share this episode with them? Just, hit the relevant buttons on your podcasting app, send it to a friend, and I'm sure they would thank you for it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Chris. All
right.
Yeah, looking forward to the next one then.
Yes, well, we'll catch up same time, same place.
Mm-hmm. Until then, my friend, see ya.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget that we are constantly updating our resources inside the Wealth Builders membership site to help you create, build, and protect your wealth. Head over to wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership right now for free access. That's wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership.